So, the Oscars are tonight, and I still don't care, which is weird that I'm doing this video and I don't care, but whatever. So, welcome to my video of me ranking the 10 nominees for Best Picture this year. I've kind of made a tradition for myself to at least see the 10 films that are nominated for Best Picture, or however many there were. I guess now this is the year they kind of decided to go back to 10 nominations. But I kind of made it I kind of made it a challenge for myself to actually see the best picture nominees for a few years now, so I can at least go in and say, which ones I think are the best, which ones I think deserve it, which ones I think don't deserve it. And so I got 10 movies here, and for the most part, I do like most of these movies, or at least respect most of these movies. And there's only one that I just genuinely am just puzzled by. You'll see in a moment. But let me dive right into it. The 10 nominees for Best Picture from the worst to the best. Let's get to it. At number 10, Don't Look Up. Now, this movie, I was really looking forward to it. I know Adam McKay has kind of changed his career course. He started making all these movies with Will Ferrell, like Anchorman and Talladega Nights and Step Brothers and all that. And then he decided to do all these interesting satirical real life movies like Big Short and Vice, and now he's doing a satirical movie about climate change, about mass media and such. And it had a massive cast with Jennifer Lawrence, Leonardo DiCaprio, Meryl Streep, Kate Blanchett, Jonah Hill, just to name a few. And the trailer made it seem really interesting and made it seem like it was very relevant considering some of the things that have been going on in the last few years, not just global warming, but with a massive pandemic. It seemed like a really interesting movie, and I felt it really fell short. I felt like there were moments where I was laughing, but I thought the tone was just very uneven. I felt some of the performances are really good, particularly Jennifer Lawrence. Leonardo DiCaprio's good for the most part. Jonah Hill's good. A lot of performances are good, but it just gets so lost for a while. Like, there's this whole subplot where Leonardo DiCaprio just starts having an affair with Kate Blanchett. It just didn't really make sense to me. And I felt like at times it was too on the nose. For a lot of the climate change stuff felt too on the nose for me. And a lot of the political aspects of it were a little too on the nose. At times at times it's like, okay, that's clever. And sometimes it's like, that's just blatantly obvious. So, and don't get me wrong, I agree with the message, and I do think it is an important movie to watch, but I also feel like if this movie cut out at least 30 minutes, it would have been really good. And admittedly, the last scene of the movie is incredible to see, and it definitely is intriguing to see, like a movie like, about how the world is ending, it actually does end in this movie. That was interesting to see. I just feel like this is one of those Oscar nominee movies that I'm just scratching my head at. I feel like it's not even close to being one of the best movies of last year. It's not focused. There are some things that do work, like some of the performances do work, and I do like some of the themes that they don't really address as well, like how women are portrayed in the media, like how Jennifer Lawrence kind of goes through that, and like how she kind of feels ignored, and how they kind of negatively portray her, like they named the comet after her, and that stuff is interesting. It's just the movie gets lost for a while, and then it just never feels like it fully recovered. It's probably the worst Best Picture nom. It's definitely the best. It's definitely the worst Best Picture nominee of the year, and it's just I just think it's a misfire to me. At number 9 is The Power of the Dog, the movie that I think will win Best Picture, even though I don't think it deserves it. It's a movie that feels like it is just pure Oscar bait. Everything about it just screams, I want an Oscar. Don't get me wrong, I respect this movie. I just don't feel connected to it. The performances are really good. All 4 leads who are nominated, Benedict Cumberbatch, Kirsten Dunst, Jesse Plemons, Cody Smith-McPhee, they're all really good. But I kind of just felt like it was a movie that was trying really hard to win an Oscar, and I just didn't feel really connected to the story. I just felt like it's like I respect the story, I respect the performances, I respect everything about it. It is an incredibly well-made movie. On that alone, it's something that any cinephile should watch. But it's just not as engaging as I was hoping it would be. And it will probably win Best Picture tonight. And I'm going to be upset if it does win. I'm not going to be surprised. I'm just going to be disappointed. At number 8 is Licorice Pizza. Now, I've enjoyed most of Paul Thomas Anderson's movies, and I was really looking forward to this one. And kind of like with Power of the Dog, I do think it is an incredibly well-made movie. Everything about it's really good. Like I think Alana Haim is really good for her first role. Cooper Hoffman's good as well. Benny Safdie I thought was really good in this movie too. I love the look of this movie. I love the soundtrack of this movie. I also kind of like the message of the movie, not the one that you're thinking of, but the message of how life is. Like maybe it's better to just go with the flow and just to kind of like, go along and find something along the way rather than just having a concrete plan. I thought that message was interesting. There were just some things about this movie that I just could not like get behind. First off, I didn't like the adult actors in this movie for the most part, except for Benny Safdie. I felt like a lot of the adult actors just didn't. They just all they did was just say who they were and what they do, and at times maybe threaten the kids in the movie. Like I didn't think Bradley Cooper deserved a Best Actor nomination, so I wasn't really surprised that he was snubbed for that. Um, I felt like at least something like Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, as controversial as some of the portrayals in that movie are, that movie didn't resort to them saying who they were and telling people what they do. We just kind of assumed who they were. As controversial as some of those portrayals were, at least that movie didn't try to talk down to us. I felt like that was annoying. And also, I don't really like aspects of the relationship between the two lead characters. I felt like the whole nature of the relationship is too far, especially given the age gap. If he was at least 18, I would have been okay with it. And also, they kind of just treat each other like crap throughout the entire movie. It's just a toxic relationship, and I don't think they wind up together past the end credits at some point. But other than that, I just don't care. Um, I did rewatch it to kind of see if thoughts have changed about the movie, and I still came out the same way I did. And normally PTA's movies kind of need a second viewing, in my opinion, but this one, no, it didn't need that. At number 7 is Drive My Car, the last movie I saw before this video. And this movie is another movie that's very well made, but also kind of very distant. I do think the actors do a good job. I just wish this movie wasn't 3 hours long. I would have settled with 2, maybe 1.5, but it just felt like when they got to the point, they kept going. And it just didn't really work for me. I also didn't really think the relationship between the two lead characters was as strong as the movie suggests. I do think there are interesting explorations about grief and how we deal with grief and how we deal with, all that. And that stuff is interesting. I just feel like this movie could have gotten to the point a lot faster. And also, I felt like it ended multiple times. I felt like, oh, this could be the ending. Oh, no, here's this. Okay, this makes sense. But then it just feels like it ends, and then it continues on for another minute, and then it ends. I didn't like that either. I just, get this movie over with. But other than that, it is an interesting watch, but just know going in that this movie's 3 hours long. And I feel like there are a lot of movies that are so long this year. I feel like if you can interest me for a very long time, then you're doing a good enough job. Like, I've already seen The Batman multiple times, and I never feel the length with that movie. This movie I kind of did. So that's on me, I guess. At number 6 is King Richard. The performances by Will Smith and Aunjanue Ellis are really good. The actresses playing Venus and Serena Williams are also really good. I also really like that this movie doesn't portray Richard Williams in a perfect light. I feel like that was my main concern with this movie, is that everything that they were going to show in this movie was just positive. I wouldn't have liked that, honestly. And I'm actually really glad that it kind of shows the parenting types of this movie. Like, some are really strong and how, they're tough, and sometimes it's calming. And I also felt like it was an interesting take on this movie. And that was my main concern about this movie going into it. I was kind of worried that they were just going to show only the good aspects of Richard Williams, and kind of reading into some of the things he did. It's like, this doesn't sound like it's going to be good. And I'm glad that the movie didn't shy away from that. And also, I felt like, even though my main issues with this movie is that it's a little too long. It's 2.5 hours. And also, I feel like there are a lot of cliches for this movie, particularly because it is, a biopic. And I do think it is a good watch, especially if you love Will Smith. It's an interesting watch, I'll say. It's a good movie. Will Smith, Aunjanue Ellis are good. The actors are really good. I just wish that this movie was a little shorter, to be honest. If that's my only complaint, I guess I shouldn't be complaining too much. At number 5, Belfast. This was a movie that I knew very little about. I knew Kenneth Branagh directed it. I guess it was semi-autobiographical, and I do think the movie is very interesting. I love the way it's shot. I love the black and white cinematography with few instances of light. And I do like the whole aspects of this movie. Like, it's mainly about a kid's perspective of like the world going, what's going on in his world. Like, his country's going through a massive civil war, and it kind of shows, him going through all these horrible things that are going on, and also his family trying to figure it out, but trying to be positive, and that's not easy. Do you think the actors do a really good job? Jude Hill as this kid, his parents, Jamie Dornan, Katrina Balfe, Ciarán Hinds as his grandfather, Judi Dench as his grandma. I thought was the weakest adult in this movie. I thought her performance was just forgettable, to be honest. Didn't really do much for me. I don't understand how she got a nomination for Best Supporting Actress instead of Katrina Balfe. I do think it's an interesting movie to watch. Just know that it can feel aimless at times. Like, it kind of goes through the aspect, it kind of just goes through life aimlessly, and it kind of does that for the majority of the runtime. Some people may have a problem with that. I really didn't, but I do think it's an interesting watch at some point. At number 4, I'm putting Nightmare Alley. This was a movie that I did not expect to get a Best Picture nomination, and I'm kind of glad it did. I love most of this movie. I love most performances, particularly Bradley Cooper, Cate Blanchett. They're the best in the movie. I love the production design. I love the cinematography. I love seeing Bradley Cooper just go into this rabbit hole of insanity and horrible things that he's doing. And I just love that in retrospect. I thought that was really interesting. A lot of this movie is really interesting to see. It's a little too long. This movie's way too long. It's 150 minutes, 2.5 hours. And it doesn't need to be 2.5 hours, to be honest. You could have cut a lot out of this movie. Not necessarily. I feel like you could cut a lot of this movie, but I don't know where to cut exactly. I think I would cut out the Mary Steenburgen parts. And also, I don't really like the Guillermo del Toro-isms where basically something that's blatantly obvious is just said out loud. Mainly in the beginning when Willem Dafoe's giving his speech about, is it a man or is it a beast? Or there's this poster in the background where it's like, look at you, you sinner. Like, it's blatantly obvious, but that's just Guillermo del Toro. He's so passionate about what he does, but I don't have a problem with that. I mean, I do have a problem with that, but I let it go. But it's an interesting watch, especially on a second time, and this is the movie that I thought Bradley Cooper was snubbed for instead of Licorice Pizza. At number 3 is West Side Story. I did not expect this movie to be so good. I really enjoyed most of this movie. Rachel Zegler, I thought she was really good. Ariana DeBose was really good. Mike Feist is really good. Almost all the actors in this movie are really good. I think a lot of the music's great. A lot of the choreography is great. I do think it is an improvement on West Side Story, which I'm not a big fan of the original West Side Story. I feel like it's a little dated. And this movie is really good. I loved a lot of the musical numbers, like America, which is sung throughout the streets. That was really cool to see. Also, I also didn't like how unrealistic West Side Story was. So I kind of felt like this was a slightly more realistic take on it. I like that a lot. What I don't like in this movie is Ansel Elgort. Now, controversy aside, I felt like he was the weakest of the movie. I felt like he was miscast as Tony, and there were some shots in this movie that are kind of creepy in retrospect. But other than that, I do think it is an improvement on West Side Story, and I think if you were a skeptic of this movie for whatever reason, I would give this movie a chance. At number 2, Dune. Now, I put Dune as my favorite movie of last year, and I kind of regret that because there are so many problems with this movie, but I still really like it. I do like a lot of the action. I do like a lot of the actors in this movie. I do love the visuals of this movie. I do like the stories. I do like the build-up of this movie. I also really felt like when I watched it for the first time in IMAX, that it felt like I was actually in another world. It felt like I was actually experiencing being in someone else's world for once in a movie. Well, not necessarily once in a movie, but like for the first time in a long time, I felt that way. What I didn't really care for is some aspects of the plot and like how they decided to end things, like mainly the ending, which I felt like obviously it was a cliffhanger, but they could have done the cliffhanger a lot better than they actually did in this movie. I felt like it was just done because like, oh, we're already at 2.5 hours, we're just gonna end it here. Also, I kind of feel like they need to do a little bit better on the whole white savior narrative storyline. But other than that, I do think it is a very well-made movie. It is one of the few movies that I saw last year, twice in theaters at least. And it's definitely a movie that you needed to see in IMAX just to get the full experience. So it is an interesting, it's a well-made movie. It's definitely a movie that I shouldn't have put as my favorite movie of last year, but I don't regret seeing it, and I do feel like it's definitely one of the better movies of last year in my opinion, but I do have issues with it, obviously. But the movie that I'm putting as my number one of the best picture list is Coda. This movie is really good. This movie flew under my radar. It came on Apple TV, and this was a movie that I heard little bits about it. I heard that it had a primarily deaf cast. I heard that it was about, a deaf family, and the only person in the family is a teenager who's about to go to college. That's all I knew about this movie. And this movie is very interesting, kind of portraying that life of, this family that's, very different, but not as different as you might think. I do like seeing the perspective of these people, like how this girl feels about her family, how their family feels about this girl. And it definitely shows like a lot of the problems that this family has. It shows that they're very dysfunctional as well. I do really like seeing that. Troy Kotsur in this movie is incredible. Emilia Jones is really good. All these actors are really good in this movie, and I definitely felt like it was a humanized experience. I felt like it was a movie that I feel like at times the movie can be a little toxic given some of the things that happen in this movie, particularly Marlee Matlin's character, how she treats her daughter, which is kind of horrible at times. But the movie does make up for that at the end. I do think the acting is really good for the most part. It is lighthearted, it can be fun, and it can not necessarily fun, but definitely gives a interesting perspective. And I do think that this movie is definitely worth watching. And because it has won several awards already, like it won the PGA and the Screen Actors Guild for Best Ensemble, which is basically Best Picture to them, it could actually win Best Picture. And I would actually be really glad if it did. It's a really good movie. It's a really powerful movie. It's subtle. I would say it's subtle but strong. It's definitely a movie that you didn't expect to see, be as good as it is, and it was. Whereas something like Power of the Dog, on the other hand, which I felt like it wasn't even trying to be subtle. I felt like I felt like Coda was incredible, and I felt like it's the one, I feel like it deserves it the most of all these nominees. So I would choose Coda to win, but Power of the Dog will probably win. So, what do you think of the Best Picture nominees? How would you rank the nominees if you've seen them all? Comment down below, subscribe to the channel. This is Pat. Stay safe. I can't speak.